Okay.
Recording started.
So now that all of this has been sorted out, and thank you for being patient, I get to introduce Dr. Baca. She's the head of the Digital Art History Program at the Getty Research Institute in Los Angeles, and holds a PhD in art history and Italian language and literature from UCLA. She is also an adjunct professor in the Graduate School of Education and Information Studies at UCLA, teaching graduate seminars on metadata and indexing and thesaurus construction. Her research and publications have focused largely on descriptive metadata and controlled vocabularies for art, architecture, and material culture. Dr. Baca is currently editing a new edition of Introduction to Metadata to be published by the Getty Research Institute in 2015. And so if we could hold off on asking questions until the end, and for the people who are logged in remotely, if you could raise your hand through the Blackboard Collaborate tool, we can try and negotiate a conversation then. But yeah.
Okay, Kristen, should I get started?
Yes, please.
Okay, great. Thank you very much for the introduction, and I apologize to everybody for the inevitable technical difficulties at the beginning. I think I will plunge right in and get started because we don't have a huge amount of time. When I first talked to Kristen, too, two of the things that she asked me to stress in this presentation are the importance of cataloging and data standards. And vocabularies are an essential, or should be an essential part of that. So my presentation is focusing on vocabularies, but I want to stress that they are one part of the essential set of things for good information, documentation, and retrieval, which are metadata standards, good cataloging, and controlled vocabularies. So I will get started. First of all, I'm going to briefly talk about what a thesaurus is. And some of you may be familiar with Roget's thesaurus, which is a print thesaurus that many people have used for many, many years, which displays an alphabetical form. But when we talk about a thesaurus in information science, it is a controlled vocabulary arranged in a specific order and that is characterized by three relationships, and that's what creates the power of the thesaurus. It's not simply an alphabetical list with multiple definitions for a single term. So in this slide, what I'm showing are the three main types of relationships in a thesaurus. The first one, of course, is equivalent, so it's different ways of saying the exact same thing. Raita is the plural, raiton is the singular, raitons is the anglicized plural, and there are other name forms, and there are actually many more forms if you look this term up in our art and architecture thesaurus. So that's the equivalence relationship, which enables, if you're using a controlled vocabulary, you only have to use a TAS or index or catalog with one of those terms. If you're using the controlled vocabulary, the thesaurus, it takes all those terms along with it, so that when users search on any one of those forms, they will retrieve the relevant object. The second relationship in an electronic thesaurus is the hierarchical relationship, which is broader and narrower terms. So if the user doesn't know the exact name of an object, and in this case a raiton is a very specific type of object found in art museums that mostly curators and scholars know the term. The user can still search by a broader or more generic term, such as culinary containers or containers. And then the third type of relationship in a thesaurus is the associative relationship, which may be something that is somehow related to something, but it's not the same thing, and it doesn't live in the same part of the hierarchy. Or in this example that I'm showing you, it's something that's similar but distinguished from. So there are another type of object in cultural collections is a thing called a stirrup cup. And you see that here are the equivalent terms: coaching glasses, hunting glasses, copas de estribo in Spanish and the Dutch and German terms. But the relationship between raita and stirrup cups is is associative in the sense that they're similar but distinguished from one another. At the Getty, we have been producing controlled vocabularies since 1980, in fact. And these are the 4 vocabularies that we produce at the Getty Research Institute. The Art and Architecture Thesaurus, which is the oldest thesaurus. That's the one we started in 1980 in print form. And, of course, immediately the print form becomes obsolete the moment you print it because we add new terms and new concepts every day to our thesauri. The second thesaurus, which is huge, is the Getty Thesaurus of Geographic Names, which contains more than 1 million names, and the Union List of Artist Names, which is something of a misnomer because it doesn't just have the names and biographical information for artists and architects, but also sitters, patrons, dealers, and so on. So people and groups of people who are associated with art and cultural heritage. And then our newest vocabulary, which we only started a couple of years ago, so we're just in the process of building a critical mass of data in this vocabulary, is the Cultural Objects Name Authority, which is an authority of unique works of art, architecture, and material culture. I want to, if some of you have taken classes on controlled vocabularies and authority files and thesaurus construction, you know that there's such a thing as a title authority, but the CONA is more than a title authority because it doesn't just capture the titles, it captures enough information to uniquely identify a work of art and distinguish it from other similar works of art. Because as you know, many works of art have exactly the same title. Many pre-modern artists painted the same subjects over and over again, so you can have different works by the same artist with the exact same title and the same medium, and CONA will disambiguate those, among other things, by using a unique ID number. So I'm just going to very briefly go through what our vocabularies are that we produce here at the Getty. The Art and Architecture Thesaurus, as I mentioned, contains terms for describing art, architecture, conservation, and material culture. So these are some examples of the kinds of terms found in the AAT. Oil paintings, Baroque for the style, lithographers is an agent, sintering is a process. At the moment, there are 36,000 entries in the AAT, represented by 245,000 terms, because obviously, as I showed you in the previous examples, one concept or object or style, we call them a concept in thesaurus construction, can be represented by multiple terms. The Art and Architecture Thesaurus is multilingual, and there are several large translation projects underway, very labor-intensive because machine translation is virtually useless. So we have at the moment, we have complete Spanish, Dutch, and Dutch translations of the AAT, which were done by partner institutions, and there is a Chinese language version underway that is being developed by the Academia Sinica in Taiwan, working closely with us. So that also increases the power because users aren't constrained to search on the English language term if they want to search on the term in another language. Our second thesaurus is TGN, the Getty Thesaurus of Geographic Names. So obviously this contains information for current and historical places, archaeological sites, and geographic features. So for example, for the city of Florence, we have the name Florence, but also Firenze, the Italian term, and many other linguistic variants. Historical places like the Roman Empire and Luxor, and geographic features like the Ganges River. And as I mentioned, that TGN is the largest of our thesauri. Current totals are 1.2 million entries. I actually misspoke. It's bigger than I said it was. There are 1.2 million entries or places represented by 1.8 million names. So that, again, that includes all the variant names. The third thesaurus that we produce at the Getty is called the ULAN, the Union List of Artist Names. And as I mentioned, it does contain more information than just information on artists. So it includes names, biographical information, and bibliographic references for individual and groups involved in all aspects of art, architecture, and material culture. And here, second bullet point are some examples. Bartolo di Fredi was an Italian Renaissance painter, and there are a lot of variant names on that record. The Biggerstaff brothers are two artists who worked together and then made up a name for themselves called the Biggerstaff brothers. We also include the names of so-called corporate bodies, institutions related to art. So the National Palace Museum in Taipei. Goupil and Company was a very important French art dealer. Song Gaozong, Emperor of China, was a very important patron of the arts, and as you can see, we also include his name in addition to English. And we include the Chinese characters, the glyphs, which are contributed by our partner institutions. The current totals in ULAN are 223,000 entries. That is 223,000 records that refer to individuals or groups of individuals, and 582,000 names, again, because of all the variants. And the fourth vocabulary, Kona, includes not only titles, so it's not exclusively a title authority, it's a work authority. Titles and other information for movable works such as paintings and sculpture, things that can move, and then built works like architecture, buildings, bridges, etc. And then there are some examples of work. Hagia Sophia is a famous architectural work. The Mona Lisa, you all know that painting, and The Night Watch is another famous painting by Rembrandt. So at the moment, Kona contains 10,000 titles, but in the next few years, we're going to do a concerted effort to get partner institutions to work with us to build up a critical mass of information. We think that this will be a key part of the semantic web. I should tell you too, since the people listening to this talk are in library school, you all know what a name authority is. But in the art history world, we have encountered very strong resistance to the title Cultural Objects Name Authority. First of all, because most people who don't go to library school don't know what a name authority file is, and that word authority is very frightening to them. When we're actually, even though we've trademarked the name, we may end up changing the name of Kona over the next couple of years in order to get art historians to use it because they are so resistant to that word authority. And I would welcome some comments or questions on that at the end if we have time. How are controlled vocabularies used? Well, as I mentioned, and as you all know, they're used as sources of terminology for cataloging, documentation, and what is currently known as tagging. In other words, indexing, assigning words or terms to an information object. The Art and Architecture Thesaurus, for example, will be one of the vocabularies that will be incorporated into the GCI. I should have spelled that out. That is the Getty Conservation Institute. And they are developing an open source platform called Arches for capturing information on cultural heritage sites around the world, and they're going to build some controlled vocabularies into that open source software, and the AAT will be one of those. They can also be used as knowledge bases or lookup tools where if you just don't know what a term or name or place refers to, you can look it up and find some information and some bibliographic citations for that. And then the most powerful thing, I think, and not yet fully exploited to its total potential, is the use of controlled vocabularies to facilitate search and retrieval. If they're used properly, controlled vocabularies can greatly enhance both the precision and recall of online searches. In this linked data world, and I think that you all, or most of you, have heard about linked data and linked open data, and I'm going to talk about that a little bit more in a minute. this idea of the semantic links, not just hyperlinks like on the internet that are created by a human being, but the semantic links between things are very important and very powerful. And in our data model from the beginning, all of our vocabularies are linked to each other. So if you have a record for an artist and the type of the styles that he painted in, for example, the styles would be in the AAT and the artist information would be in the ULAN. The places where the artist worked and lived are in the TGN, and that's linked to the ULAN. And then the works themselves represented in CONA can be linked to all three of the other vocabularies. And I think I have a visual example of this later on in the presentation. Vocabularies do not build themselves. So where do the terms and names come from? They are not built by magic by a computer program. We use a very sophisticated computer system, but human beings create the vocabularies. As I mentioned before, our vocabularies, we don't build them up record by record because it would take us even longer than it's taking us to build these things. So our model is we do build up some records ourselves, but the main way that our vocabularies grow is by contributions from other contributors. The ones in blue on this side are internal Getty contributors. So here the GCIs, the Getty Conservation Institute, they have contributed thousands of conservation terminology to the AAT. JPGM is the Getty Museum. They're also a contributor. The Getty Provenance Index is one of the earliest art history projects to use computer technology. They have contributed tens of thousands of artist names to the ULAN. And then the ones in purple are some of our main contributors from outside the Getty. The Courtauld Institute in London, the Frick Library in New York, the Grove Dictionary of Art is an important contributor, and the RKD, the Netherlands Institute for Art History, is a huge contributor. They've done the full Dutch translation of the Art and Architecture Thesaurus. The Centro de Documentación de Bienes Patrimoniales in Chile has done the full Spanish translation. And as I mentioned a minute ago, the Academia Sinica in Taiwan is doing a full Chinese translation of the Art and Architecture Thesaurus. This is really complicated, as you might imagine, because since the thesauri grow constantly, it's a big challenge keeping all the linguistic versions in sync with each other and making sure that the master file, which we keep at the Getty, has all of the linguistic variants. As I mentioned, the Getty vocabularies are built in an information system by human beings. And I should say, too, the information system is built by human beings. So I really did want to show this because there is a common misperception among the general public and in upper management in many institutions that the computer technology is magic and that you don't need people to do the work. And that is absolutely not true, as you all know. So we have a technical team that we've worked with for many, many years. This is Joan Kopp, who I've worked with for more years than I can tell you, and Greg Garcia. They built our information system, the production system in which we build the vocabs and in which we receive contributions, and they update it, and they also are working on our big linked open data project. So they both build the system in which we construct our vocabularies, and then they make it possible for us to publish them, in other words, push them out to the web in a variety of ways. And then these are more technical people who provide things like servers and web support and so forth. And then on the information science side, that's the computer side of it. On the information science side, my colleague Patricia Harpring is the managing editor. She has a PhD in art history, and she is both the editor and the production manager of the Getty vocabularies. We have 3 full-time data standards editors who all have MLIS degrees, and I believe that 2 of them also have art history degrees. And then every year we have a graduate intern who we train in using our sophisticated vocabulary production system. I should mention, too, I didn't include this on the slide, Patricia wrote a book called Introduction to Controlled Vocabularies. It's available in print form, but it's also available free on the web. We just did an updated version of it in the last year or so, so I highly recommend that book. I use it for teaching a lot. So you can find Patricia's book, Introduction to Controlled Vocabularies, on the Getty website, and you can download all the chapters for free if you're interested. Oh, here it is. I did include it. So sorry. So this is Introduction to Controlled Vocabularies. And the reason why I have, every once in a while at the Getty, not every once in a while, quite frequently, we get asked, why are we building these tools? Why doesn't somebody else build them? And the answer is, we've got the expertise. We have the expertise in thesaurus construction and in art history. And frankly, we have the resources, although as you can see, the department is quite tiny. It's a managing editor and 3 vocab editors. So the reason why we build these is to serve the cultural heritage and information science community, and because, frankly, we have the expertise in it. So I highly recommend Patricia's book. This is an example. I was talking about how our vocabularies are multilingual, and we're doing a concerted effort to make them become more and more multilingual as time goes by inviting other institutions to contribute terminology. This is actually a portion of a screenshot for that object, the write-on that I showed you at the beginning of the presentation. This is an actual AAT record, the web version of it, not the back-end version, showing the various forms. So there, writa is the plural, write-on is the singular. We also indicate which contributors have that term. We have the ancient Greek form, the transliterated ancient Greek form. Our Taiwanese collaborators have contributed the Chinese, both the Chinese transliterated forms in both the Wade-Giles, which is the more old-fashioned transliteration scheme, and the more recent one, which is Hanyu Pinyin. But because we want to be inclusive, we don't get rid of old versions or old transliterations. We keep them clustered to the vocabulary record, because, first of all, because it's part of the history of that object, but also because it increases retrieval, because we don't know if users will be searching on the transliterated Hanyu Pinyin version, the transliterated Wade-Giles version, the Chinese traditional version, or the English or Spanish or Greek or whatever. So we cluster together all of those linguistic variants. I lead a group called the International Terminology Working Group, which we try to meet about every year and a half. The last time we met was in last September in Dresden, and you can see there, it's a combination of content people and technical people. So there's Joan Cobb and Greg Garcia, who are our technical experts. There's our pals from Taiwan, who have done a tremendous amount of work. She's from the Rijksmuseum. There's a German project. And I should mention, too, I don't know if some of you may be familiar with the work of, this is Dr. Marcia Lee Zhang from Kent State University, a friend of mine and a big information science professor. And she attends, you can see her at past meetings. Professor Zhang attends all of the International Terminology Working Group meetings so that we make sure that we are continuing to follow the latest trends and standards in information science and in the expression of controlled vocabularies. And actually, I have to say, it was Marcia Zhang who really pushed us into making a project to express our vocabularies as linked open data, which I'll talk about in a minute. This is an example I use a lot in my presentations to show why should we even bother? As you can see, these two vases are very similar. They're obviously done in the same style. The one in the National Palace Museum in Taipei is described as Fenzai. This is obviously the transliterated English using Roman characters. Fenzai. And in the British Museum, a vase in exactly the same style is called famille rose. It's a French term meaning pink family. And if these terms, and obviously they're referring to the exact same style of porcelain. In a controlled vocabulary, in the AAT, what we've done is we link these two forms. So if the user is searching on famille rose or fenzai, also in the Chinese characters, they will retrieve all the relevant objects. Whereas right now, the way the National Palace Museum has their object described or cataloged, and the way the British Museum has their object described, if you searched for fenzai at the British Museum, you would not retrieve this object. So I think this is a very telling example of the power of controlled vocabularies for enhancing retrieval. I mentioned that our technical team helps us make our vocabulary data available in a variety of ways. So the first way is, and we've been doing this for many years, is on the Getty website. So all of our vocabs are available for free on the web, just as individual databases to search, and they get very high usage. As you can see, there are about 25,000 searches per month in all of the vocabularies combined. Also, for many years, we have licensed the full raw data files. They're licensed by museums and other cultural institutions who want to use them for cataloging or retrieval. They also have been licensed by several museum collection management vendors and other vendors because of the power of, they can build it into the collection management software, for example, so that the terms are there to use for cataloging and retrieval. They're built into the system. And this is kind of a complicated process. We make it available in a variety of formats, including, in recent years, we kind of prefer our XML format that we have. But now, we are making a concerted effort to make them available as linked open data. And I think that probably most of you at least have some familiarity with linked open data. And I couldn't help but include this quote from Richard Wallace at OCLC, saying how important the release of the Getty Vocabularies as linked open data is to the so-called semantic web. Also, I just love it that his actual title at OCLC is Linked Data Evangelist. I think that's kind of telling and also somewhat humorous. But I do agree with Richard Wallace when he says that vocabularies are a key, trusted, attributable resource in the ever more interconnected world. So things like information science is not becoming less important, it's becoming more important. The Getty started, so I work, the Getty Research Institute where I work and where the vocabularies are produced is just one part of the Getty. The part that most people have heard of is the Getty Museum. I do not work at the Getty Museum, I work at the Getty Research Institute. I can see the Getty Museum from my window though. And there is also the Getty Conservation Institute, the Getty Foundation, and of course all the administrative parts of the Getty. And a couple of years ago, our CEO, James Cuno, really encouraged us to develop an open content program. So I encourage you to go look at this. What we do under this open content program, and it's through a thing called the Getty Search Gateway, is the Getty Museum and the Getty Research Institute make digital images that don't have any repro rights associated with them, any problems with reproduction rights. So things that are open content that we legally have the ability to make available. They are available with their metadata records, free of charge, on the Getty website, with high-resolution digital images that people can download and use for teaching, publication. You can make a coffee mug. You can make a shower curtain. We're letting the content go. That's kind of a big deal for museums. I have to say the Getty was not the first to do that. The Rijksmuseum in Amsterdam was one of the very first, and the Tate in London. But it definitely is a trend because we are nonprofit educational institutions, and we should make our content freely available. As far as people making the shower curtain, we just have to live with it and let it go. I mean, you could make a high-res reproduction of an object at the Getty and put it in a frame and sell it on eBay, and the Getty is not going to prosecute you. As I mentioned, so that's the open content up to now with regard to images, mostly still images. I think there might be some video files in the open content, but not a huge amount at this moment. There will be more in the future. Another part of the open content program, besides providing free access to digital images, is open access and free access to our data. And you probably all heard the term big data too, which is now becoming a big buzzword. So we released the AAT last February, so a year ago, and the TGN in August. We did blog posts on the Getty Iris, that's the Getty blog. And we used a lot of social media, so we did Facebook posts and Twitter feeds and stuff like that. And in the first week that this blog post came out about TGN being released as linked open data, we got 1,700 hits, and it was tweeted more than 200 times. So that's one of the ways we get the word out about our vocabularies as linked open data. The next one to come will be ULAN in the next few months. And then Kona, I'm not sure when, because I think we're waiting to get a critical mass of data in there before we release it as linked open data. I should say that expressing a complex vocabulary, a complex thesaurus like our Thesauri as linked open data is not simple. It took months of man hours because you have to build these things called ontologies, which is based on, and Dr. Marcia Zhang helped us a lot with that. You have to analyze your data, express it as an ontology, and then express it in a standard format, standard RDF format that is linked open data, and then you make it available in the cloud. If you do a Google search on Getty linked open data, you can get to our linked open data page, which is kind of scary looking because it's for implementers. It's very technical, but if you like geeky kind of stuff like that, you can take a look at that. So this is the vision of what linked open data can or could do, is that we express our vocabularies as linked open data, and then they can create, and this is, the thing about linked open data is, it is supposed to be able to automatically, in other words, the machine creates meaningful links between one resource and another because the meaning is actually semantically built into the data. So it wouldn't automatically connect the Cherokee, a Jeep Cherokee, with the Cherokee Native American tribe because the linked open data record knows the difference semantically between those two homographs, Cherokee and Cherokee. You might know that there's a toothpaste called Rembrandt. If things were expressed in linked open data and you search for Rembrandt the artist, you would not retrieve Rembrandt the toothpaste because the semantic meaning, Rembrandt as artist with his life dates and so on, would be expressed in the linked open data record. There is, again, probably a lot of you have already studied the semantic web and seen a lot of the developments there. In my opinion, it's still a burgeoning thing. I don't think the semantic web is a full reality yet, but that's the promise of the semantic web, that you will be searching for things and get links to something that you're really looking for, not something that just happens to match the characters of a keyword search. Oh yeah, this is a visualization that I did because I'm constantly asked to demonstrate why is it good to do our vocabs as linked open data, and this is a slide I used at the CDOC conference in Dresden in September to show, this is the artist Albrecht Dürer. If any of you are familiar with him, he's the most important German artist of the Renaissance. And he was very vain. He did a lot of self-portraits. So again, Kona will help to disambiguate that because he probably did a dozen self-portraits of himself. And Kona will disambiguate those and have an individual record for each self-portrait by Albrecht Dürer. But it can also link to the ULAM record with the different forms of his name, to the TGN, Thesaurus of Geographic Names, for the places where he worked, and that he depicted, because he was German, but he lived in Italy a lot. It can link to his teacher through ULAND, and we encode those relationships. I don't know if you can see this clearly on the slide, but we actually encode relationships. These are the associative relationships I was talking about before. So we know he was the apprentice of Wohlgemuth, the teacher of Baldung, the child of Albrecht Dürer the Elder, the founder of the Dürer Workshop, and so on. And these can all be linked, so-called automatically via linked open data. Oh, actually, I want to go back. What I'm showing here too is this obviously is not a work by Dürer. This work at the bottom of the slide is a famous watercolor of a stag beetle by Dürer, a very famous image. And a few years ago, a group of contemporary artists did works inspired by works by artists from previous periods. And this is John Baldessari, a contemporary artist, who did a riff on Dürer's stag beetle with a big pin in it. And this is also an object in the Getty Museum. And again, in the linked open data world of the semantic web, a user would retrieve that stag beetle because the information system would know that it's related to the original watercolor by Dürer. Kristen, how am I doing on time?
We have about 10 minutes left.
I'm going to... Okay, I'm going to... Show these last few slides or open it up for questions?
No. Why don't you go through the remainder of your slides?
Okay. Okay. Kristen and I have talked several times. We have met only virtually so far, but I know she's planning to come to LA. I just want to tell you guys it's going to be 80 degrees here today, and I know you've been having very cold weather. But she and I had a discussion. I was asking who the audience was going to be for this presentation, and she thought that it might be useful for me to include these last slides, which are things that I use for my students at UCLA, talking about some of my thoughts about information professionals in this day and age. This is a very personal view, I should say, but this is what I think information professionals are key things for an information professional to have. Obviously, a strong foundation in the principles of information science. You don't necessarily know how to have to know how to build a database unless you become a technologist, but you have to know how databases work and how the web works. Ability to speak the languages, what I mean by that is the ability to communicate with technical experts and with non-technical experts in order to get the information systems that you need. And in your lifetime, probably most of you will have to write an RFP, a request for proposal, for example, which it's a communication tool for getting an information system. Obviously, you should have in-depth knowledge and skill in one area. You can't know it all, so I'm sure you all have a specialization. This is, again, a very personal view of mine, but an awareness of what technology can and cannot do. Again, that linked open data model is not magic. It only works if the underlying semantically linked data is there. The data itself does not get created by magic without human endeavor. And then why are we doing it? Because, in the many years that I've been working on technology projects, many times we have done projects simply because the technology exists, but they're not actually answering a question or a need of our patrons. Obviously, strong communication skills are important. That's what these two things are. And constant change, because the technology landscape changes literally from moment to moment. 10 years ago, if you had asked us, would we express our vocabularies as linked open data, we wouldn't probably have even known what it was. And institutions and institutional priorities changed a lot. Project management skills are very important. We look for that in a lot of job postings that we have. I mentioned this thing, the ability to write an RFP. This actually isn't a joke. You probably will have to write an RFP or a grant proposal during your professional life. I think giving clear, engaging presentations is an important skill. We had a visitor from the Google Cultural Institute, which is scary enough in itself, last week here at the Getty. She was a very charming person, and her presentation skills were so bad that the presentation was a complete failure. So it's, as probably you all know, it's not that easy to give a good presentation. You can be a leader both as a manager or in the trenches. You have to be a team player. You can't be a cowboy working alone. Kristen and I talked a lot about this. You have to have knowledge of metadata standards such as MARC, MODS, NETS, EAD, Dublin Core, and all the mechanisms that are being used now for integrated access, mapping, creating federated search, and all those kinds of issues that librarians are dealing with every moment today. You can't be a loner. Don't be a know-it-all. This may be discouraging for me to say too creative or inappropriately creative. Since you're in library school, I guess you do know that you have to follow certain rules. So you have to think creatively, but within the rules of what information science can do and what technology can do. And then I see we really are kind of running out of time. These last couple of slides have to do with the kinds of jobs, and we know that the job market has not been good recently, but there are so many job opportunities potentially open to LIS graduates that didn't exist before because those jobs didn't exist before. There are new jobs now. You could still get a job as a reference librarian, as a systems librarian, and so forth. But there are other fields like project management, information architecture. A lot of companies now, corporations, have people that do so-called knowledge management. So I just gave some examples of some of the jobs that people with an MLIS, smart people with an MLIS, could get. And so I'm happy to say that many of my former students now have jobs like this. So it's not just limited to the traditional librarian job, which is an important job, but web producer, systems librarian, so that's much more technical, an application manager of a particular application, such as a collection management system. Usability experts are extremely important. That's a place where everybody, including the Getty, drops the ball. We have job titles at the Getty called Vocabulary Editor. We created a new job title called Data Standards Editor and Data Standards Administrator at the Getty Museum. At Disney, I helped them create the position of Corporate Taxonomist. And there are Digital Project Coordinator and Digital Project Specialist jobs, too. We just recently hired here at the Getty Research Institute our first digital humanities specialist who also does project coordination, and it was a great hire. Some more positions. Catalogers are more important than ever. Digital archivist. A lot of these other jobs are more familiar. I should say, too, this metadata librarian, there are new in the last 5 years, let's say, 5 to 10 years, new job positions called metadata librarian, metadata library specialist, metadata wrangler. Again, one of my former students from UCLA is the metadata wrangler for the Getty Research Portal. So all day long, she maps records from institutions all over the world that are expressed as Dublin Core, XML, or MARC, or Unimarc, or different versions of data standards, and she maps them into a single standard so that they can be federated in the Getty Research Portal. That's one of the biggest success stories of my former students, although I have quite a lot of them. And then two last thoughts. These are very obvious. I'm sure you know this. It really is important to get involved in at least one professional organization, either on the local or the national or the international level. You can't belong to all of them, but ALA, SLA, Society of Architectural Historians, whatever is relevant for what your specialization is. And then also find your mentors. I have mentors who mentor me in XML and things that I wasn't such an expert in before, because you can't know it all. So you have to find professional colleagues and nurture those relationships so that you are aware of all the important things that are going on in our field, because you can't read every single bit of the literature every moment. And I'm just finishing with this image. Probably a lot of you are familiar with this artist, Arcimboldo, an Italian Renaissance artist who did a lot of portraits made out of fruit and flowers. But this is Arcimboldo's picture of a librarian. Thank you.
So I think we probably have time for one or two questions, if anybody would like to chime in. There's a lot of really interesting information, so processing is also not a bad thing. But
and Kristen, I think you will. And Kristen, I think you will. You can make these slides available. You can make these slides available to people.
Yes, I can. So the session was recorded, and I have a copy of the slides. So yes.
Okay, great. And in fact, if people, if people think of other questions, if Kristen's willing to receive them, she can send them along to me, and I'll be happy to answer them via email.
Heather had a question in the chat box. If you could speak more on why.
I see that from Heather. I see that from Heather. Yeah. That is a good question, Heather. That's a good question, Heather. We have gotten such negative feedback from art historians because that word authority scares them, because they misunderstand and think that we're going to tell them how they must, what term they must use. Kristen, can I open the web from here?
I don't actually know how to do that.
Okay, I will. But if you go into the AAT or go into the UN and look up any artist like Michelangelo, or pick any artist you're interested in. Look up that. Look up the entry for that artist. You'll see that there, in some places, we have dozens and dozens of different names for the artist. And because of that word authority, and because there is a so-called preferred name, which is also a problem, I call it the display name. So the display name for Michelangelo, for example, will be Buonarroti Michelangelo, because we have to pick one display name to appear in hierarchical displays. But what we're saying with our authority files is we don't care what form users use, as long as they use one of the forms on the record, and then it takes all the other forms with them. But just having that word authority in the title of CONA makes art historians dig in their heels and say, I am not going to let you tell me what I have to call something. So it's actually a communication and marketing problem. The tool itself doesn't enforce anything. It does. Also, I have to say it's a vestige of the old days, because if you think of the Library of Congress name authority file or the Library of Congress subject authority file, they have the word authority in there. And in the olden days, particularly, what it was telling catalogers was, when you retrieve a record in the Library of Congress name authority file, pick the preferred name for cataloging, because it was a way of enforcing consistency in cataloging. In the electronic world, that's actually no longer necessary. As long as you capture the unique ID number, it doesn't matter what name form you use. And I would encourage you all also to take a look, if you haven't already looked at it. Oh yeah, wow, this is, whoever just asked this just read my mind about MU libraries adding, is there a discussion about adding ULAN to VIAF? The Virtual International Authority file, it's in there. We were the first non-library to contribute to VIAF. So if you look up Michelangelo in VIAF, and you'll see that there's the Getty record for him is part of the cluster. So we're definitely part of that world. There's talk at the Library of Congress about doing a subject version of VIAF, because VIAF only contains personal and corporate names. They want to do a virtual international, I guess, subject authority file or whatever they're going to call it, and at that point we would contribute art and architecture and or TGN terms, but we're definitely already in VIAF, so thank you for answering that, asking that question. I should have mentioned that. Kristen, now I think we are past the hour limit. So I will repeat that if people have other questions, they can send them to Kristen. And Kristen, you can make my slides available as a PDF.
Excellent. I will do that. Thank you so much. This was absolutely wonderful. Thank you.
Okay, great. And maybe you and I can do a debriefing sometime in the future.
Yes, indeed.
Okay, great.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody, for your attention.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye. Bye.